And this week we're going to talk about another orientation, the interpretive or interpretivist orientation. So whereas positivism, post-positivism fit in this empirical analytic orientation that we understand for the most part as science, natural science, and some approaches to social sciences, when you think more about humanities, when you think about literature, when you think about um, philosophy, history, so those academic disciplines are focused on something else. So let me go back to axiology again. Remember the study of values. We said that in science, the main guiding values were the technical interest, the desire to generalize, to predict, to control, and especially controlling nature for human benefit. Okay, in the humanities, it's a different focus entirely because a different set of values, a different interest is guiding that type of inquiry. So Habermas would what he had in mind by the practical interest were human interests and values placed on understanding, on meaning making, on socially constructing narratives that were meaningful and useful to human beings. So the goal, rather than getting to absolute truth claims about reality that could be objective, perfectly objective, and to get to that one truth. Remember dialectic, trying to get closer to the truth. An interpretive approach is, because it's got that element of subjectivity in it. Remember, it's not just objectivity. There's also the knowing subject contributing something to the knowledge production process, as well as the object of reality. So social constructionism as an epistemology is taking the interaction between the object, between the subject, and in a social context, a historical context, a political context, all those important background social foundations factors, and constructing meaning, human meaning from experience, from interactions with the object. And the goal in this approach, the primary goal, is to enhance understanding and to construct meaning, to reconstruct meaning, and to try to have a fuller understanding of various reasonable approaches to understanding in different ways. So I guess an easy way to understand this might be that they believe in the possibility of multiple knowledges, multiple epistemologies, or multiple understandings, because human subjects are diverse. So even if there is an objective reality, human subjects are going to interact with that objective reality or an object of reality from different perspectives. And they're going to construct different meanings based on different contexts and different subjectivities. And when they do that, interpretivists are generally guided by something like reasonable pluralism. That as long as the views are reasonable and warranted, you may not end up with perfect agreement among everybody. Instead, you might end up with a range of reasonable perspectives on a certain topic. So the goal then would be to elevate the reasonable ideas above the unreasonable ideas without necessarily saying that one is the best. So the goal there is for scholarship to produce warranted, reasonable claims that are contextually based and that are focused on meaning rather than objective reality. Okay, as far as communication goes, the primary approaches are dialogue and dialectic. So if you remember, dialectic is that engaging across difference for the purposes of getting to truth, and that was a classical approach to the humanities. So if Aristotle, or even let's say if Plato is wandering around Athens and he is being a gadfly and he's engaging with other people trying to produce philosophical truths or trying to get closer to the philosophical truth, he may engage in dialectic to do that. But there's also a process of dialogue that goes on in philosophy and history and anthropology and qualitative research, where you're trying to understand others' meanings. And in that process of dialogue, there's a more of an openness to the unanticipated, an openness to it's more of an epistemological humility. If science is saying, I have these theories, I've developed hypotheses from the theories, and I'm going to test them against reality using these procedures. Sometimes it's very limited and it's closed off intentionally from a bunch of different variables. It tries to focus on a few variables and isolate relationships and use mathematical precision. But human meaning is a lot more complicated than studying objects of reality, like studying rocks or trees. Like studying human meanings, there's a lot more subjectivity involved. So to be able to do that well, it takes dialogue, not just debate or dialectic. You have to listen and understand the other and the other's meanings. And that takes some intersubjectivity. It takes some process of trying to bracket a critical aspect, at least initially, and instead embrace a spirit of openness to understanding and vulnerability, that sort of good stuff about good relationships with others, where you're really learning from them and they're learning from you, where there's a conversation going on and an openness to changing one's mind and not trying to win through debate, not trying to necessarily be perfectly objective and critical, trying to get to the truth, but it's more like a mutual understanding, co-constructed meaning, that idea. Okay, so that's the primary approach to the humanities in the West. Dialectics is more old school philosophy and analytic philosophy and that sort of thing, and dialogue is more what you might see in general interpretivism, which we're talking about this week. Okay, let's see. So, social constructionist epistemology. As far as ontology goes, this is tricky because, in my opinion, sometimes ontology and epistemology are conflated or they're reduced into a single concept. And I think effectively that's what the interpretive approach does, is it says, okay, like reality itself may be beyond our direct comprehension, but we know it's out there. There are objects of reality, but social reality is the focus here, not physical and chemical reality. We're looking at human products, and we're trying to understand those human products as humans in the world, in a social context. So because the focus is on meaning rather than objects and their properties, we're not really looking at reality itself. We're looking at meaning, and that's kind of like reducing these two together into one concept. So you might hear people say things like there are multiple realities. Okay, from this point of view, that doesn't make any sense. But from a point of view that collapses ontology and epistemology into a single word like reality, they're basically saying that there's multiple, if you're going to use this framework, that there are multiple perceptions of reality, and they might as well be treated as if they were reality, because we can't really know for certain if some are closer to reality and some aren't. So instead of saying which of these, let's say there are 5 competing major theories about some topic that you're studying. In social constructionism and interpretivism and the humanities, the goal isn't necessarily get to the one objective truth about those meanings. It's to look at a range of reasonable interpretations. They might say, somebody in this mindset, social constructionist might say, okay, there are different realities, there are different lived experiences, and there's some ethical things that we're going to take into consideration here. So pathos is emotion, It deals with subjectivity. It deals with character, goodness. So if you're doing this more subjective approach but still constructionist approach, it's important to be open to the subjective component. So if people have different beliefs and the goal is more about mutual understanding rather than truth with a capital T, it makes sense to kind of use those words that collapse these different concepts, reality and belief. So instead of objective truth as the goal, getting to a range of reasonable, multiple truths, lowercase t truths. So it's a more relativist approach to epistemology. So you may want to say that it has a realist ontology and a relativist epistemology. It's not radical relativism. It's not that anything goes. It's just that there is a range of reasonable alternatives. That's the goal. Okay. Critical paradigm. We're going to talk more about that in the coming weeks. So I'm going to stop here for that.